My opponent calls herself a bold progressive, so I would have thought that she would be very excited to talk about Medicare for all. I want to commend her for being so enthusiastic about such a liberal policy. I'm providing real solutions. My opponent is just providing more government.
Okay. Ms. Lewis?
I'm a mental health worker, and every day I see the numerous cracks that the most vulnerable people in our community fall through. Medicare single stream is the best way to solve those problems. And I really appreciate that to bring up government in our business, because you were the one that authored the bill for the invasive ultrasound. So when you talk about government in our lives, does it only impact women?
What was his role in the vaginal ultrasound bill?
He was the co-sponsor of that bill, and that's why I kept trying to point out his hypocrisy of he stands up there and says he wants less government, but only less government when it doesn't impact women or the environment.
Oh man, transvaginal ultrasound?
A furor gripped Virginia's state legislature in recent days as Republicans push to mandate ultrasound testing, which would be internal for many women seeking abortions.
That bill would mandate that women had to see the picture of the ultrasound, and it was an invasive ultrasound as well. And if they did not want to see that picture, if they refused the picture, a document of their refusal would be in their medical file forever.
Why go that far with it?
Well, I think that's something you would have to ask my opponent, but I believe that it was just a way to kind of punish a woman for exploring the ideas of terminating her pregnancy.
And it created a national outcry. It's hard to get people to care about a state legislative bill, but he managed to do it.
In his attack ad and his emails to his supporters, he calls me extreme. I believe that he is definitely way more extreme than I am.
I thought you made an interesting point about the pipeline. He says that government doesn't work. We need to have less government or maybe no government. Yeah. But don't worry, everything's going to be...
take care of it, right.
When natural gas is transported by pipeline, we have to make sure that it is done with sufficient protections for water. And so I have made sure by writing to both our state Department of Environmental Quality and FERC to make sure that they use the authority that we have given them to make sure that our water supply is kept safe.
I am president and founder of Friends of Augusta, which is a pipeline opposition group, and I've been on the front lines for the last 4 years standing up for private property rights and against the abuse of eminent domain. A for-profit corporation should not be able to come in and take your land. My opponent voted to give them that right. Yeah. My opponent voted to give them that right, to come in and take your land for a dirty, disastrous pipeline project that's going to devalue your land, is not bringing us the jobs. So when we're talking about something that can impact so many of us and so much of our tourism and recreation dollars, that's when we need regulation. We don't need regulation in our doctor's office telling me what I can and can't do with my body.
When I say that I support raising the minimum wage, it's for businesses that are large businesses. And when working class people have more money in their pocket, they spend it. They're going out to eat more. They're going out and doing kind of recreational things. Whereas when you give money to the already super wealthy, they're investing it and they're putting in offshore accounts, which does not help us at all. I think it's really easy for folks who have never worked minimum wage and have never had to work 2 or 3 jobs, who have never had to go to their parents and beg them for money to help pay a couple $100s on your rent. I think it's easy for people like that to demonize people who are living on minimum wage, and it's easy for them to just say, oh, we can't afford that, but they've never lived that life.
It almost sounded like he didn't believe in a federal minimum wage at all.
He does not.
Okay. And he said, we shouldn't put the government in between the relationship between an employer and employee.
When businesses are required by government, once again, inserting government in between a relationship between employer and employee, requiring employers to pay a certain $15 minimum wage, that it's going to come at a cost. And is that cost going to be borne out through reduced employment, cutting back on hours?
Right now, somebody working minimum wage full-time still meets poverty standards. So someone who is busting their tail 40, 50 hours a week still has to go to the Department of Social Services and apply for Medicaid, apply for food stamps, apply for a housing choice voucher. Who pays for that? We all do.
He doesn't have to reach out to non-Republicans, whereas in order for me to win this race, I have to talk to people who are labeled, not Democrat. And in those conversations, I'm learning so much about people who either don't show up every year to vote or don't typically vote Democratic, that we've gotten very little pushback on the idea of a living wage. Because think of what that just means. A living wage. Yeah, we want somebody who is working to be able to sustain themselves and take care of themselves. And again, my opponent talks about less government, less government. Well, having someone live on minimum wage, you're making them dependent on the government and government programs.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.